Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show this October 23rd, 2022, a Sunday. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad to have you guys here. Now, here in the Delta Report, what we're going to talk about today is the war over Ukraine, and the Russians never asked anybody. They just came in there, into that country. Ukraine had not attacked them and everything. They just built up on the border and they just moved in. And in my estimation, it was a huge mistake. Let's take a look at the reason why. Let's take a look here. Russian losses. Tremendous. Personnel killed. 67,000 young Russian men gone. 67,000 wounded. 202,000 wounded. These are hundreds of thousands. Very adversely affected. Just the loss on personnel alone. It represents, now if you look at this figure over here to the hard right, it's over 30% of the entire Russian armed forces has either been wounded or killed. 30%. Over 100% of the personnel that were intended for the invasion. Originally, they had like 190,000 personnel. They've all either been wounded or killed. Look at this. Armored combat vehicles. They've lost almost 40% of the entire Russian armed forces in the armed personnel combat vehicles. 5,284. 5,000 vehicles! Can you imagine? Tanks. They've lost 2,584 tanks. 2,584 tanks. That's 78% of the entire Russian armed forces supply of tanks. They've lost 78% of their tanks. Artillery. The Russian armed forces have lost 29% of the Russian armed forces artillery. Gone. And 100% of what was intended. They've lost 1,667 artillery units. 270 aircraft they've lost. That's roughly almost 20% of the Russian armed forces aircraft are gone. Helicopters. 245. They've lost 16 ships. Of course, they must have a lot of ships because it only represents 3.1% of the Russian armed forces ships. This is tremendous losses that they're taking. The NATO and the NATO allies are sitting back and they're watching Russia bleed out. This is effectively a money pit. They made a movie with Tom Hanks years ago, and there was this old house. I guess it was in a good location. You know what they say about real estate? Location, location, location. I guess this old house was in a good location, and it looked like it was very repairable. So I guess he thought he was going to flip it. He thought he was going to make some money on this thing, this old house. So he bought the old house, going to fix it up, nice neighborhood. He'd have a mansion that's worth a lot of money. He got in there trying to work on that thing, trying to fix it. And it just absorbed all the materials he put in it, and it was still a wreck. And the movie was called Money Pit. And that's what the house was, a money pit. No matter how much you dump into it, it's just going to suck it all up. And that's what Ukraine's becoming for Russia. It's becoming a money pit. It's becoming a pit for... It's just sucking up everything that they have. And, part of the reason of this is these HIMARS. This is a machine, a tactical machine that's been given to Ukraine by the United States government. It's a truck, basically, that's got a turret on the back that's hydraulically operated. And it takes a battery of, I think, 6 missiles that slide in place. You just slide them in, and they just kind of click in place and they're ready to go. And then you put in the coordinates and the hydraulics on the back. does the aiming for you toward where those coordinates are, and then you just push launch. And then what the Ukrainians do is then they boogie on out of there as fast as they can. They can launch these things, and the enemy's not going to know until 2 or 3 minutes later. That's how long it takes to fly to the enemy. It flies roughly 50 miles to the enemy, which is a long way. I mean, 50 miles away. So they launch the thing. It's en route. Takes it a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to get there, 50 miles, you know. Meanwhile, they turn that truck around and they hit the gas and they're out of there. They're in and out in a lightning speed. They hit the gas and they can travel 60 miles an hour in that thing, boogieing on out of there. So they fire off and then they get out of there fast so that the enemy can't get a lock on their coordinates. That's what they do with these HIMARS. And then when the HIMAR lands, boom, the rocket lands, it blows up the area that was targeted on the Russian side. And so they've been targeting things like ammo dumps, enemy command centers, things like that, very effectively with these HIMARS. It's part of the reasons why the Russians has taken such big losses. Earlier in the war, they were extensively using against the tanks, the Russian tanks. They're extensively using these things like Stinger missiles and stuff, arm-launched anti-tank weapons. And look at the numbers of the tanks that they took out here: 2,584 tanks, 78% of the entire Russian armed forces of all their tanks been destroyed in Ukraine. This is a pit for. Logistically speaking, you'd think, well, you know, it's right next door to Russia. You know, logistics should be fairly compatible for Russia, but it's sucking it all. They're putting it in now. So what's happening now? Well, now they've put in this conscription in Russia, where they're going out and they're finding anybody out there that they can find that's going to fight in the war. And they've basically grabbed them, give them a paper saying, you come to such and such a place and we're going to ship you out to war. Well, they've promised them things like money, whatever, you know, pay. But the soldiers, I heard one woman, she's still waiting for her kilogram of lard for her, I guess, to pay. I know it sounds ridiculous, saying some of them with wood, firewood. I never heard of anything like it before, but this is the word I'm getting back. I don't know if it's a rumor or not, but they ain't even getting the firewood. They ain't even getting the... Now, these are the wives at home. But this is a meat grinder. This war is a meat grinder, you know, and their husbands are putting it all on the line. This thing's a meat grinder. Like I say, but they just conscripted. Hard to put a number on it. Possibly even hundreds of thousands of new men, new recruits coming in to add to these numbers of killed. That's basically what it is, because this is a meat grinder. And so these new men are coming in, these fresh recruits. And what this has done is it's reinvigorated the Russian lines a little bit. And so the Ukrainians right now have kind of went on the defensive a little bit because of all these new soldiers that are coming in from this conscription. And what's happening right now is this is what's going on right now for the next little bit. It's taking the heat off just a little bit, because Russia is like, it's kind of like, you know, you gotta, it's kind of pacified them just a little bit, waiting to see how well their new conscripts do in this battle. It's pacified the Russians just a little bit. But the Russians have got themselves into a position where they've taken such heavy losses, massive losses, that they can't back down now. It could be the end of their administration if they were to just say, okay, everybody go home, we've messed up. We messed up in all this, and we're not going to get nothing out of this. That ain't going to fly. Yeah, they're in so deep now that they got to keep trudging in this money pit. It's all or nothing. And so that's what they're going to do. But, I mean, like I say, they're consuming these soldiers right now. These new soldiers, new recruits. They're putting them out in front. And, from what I hear, I don't think they got a lot of bullets left, if any. And, this isn't going to last that much longer. It might last a couple weeks. It might last a couple months. But ultimately, where we're headed with this is the point where they're all gone. All those new fresh soldiers are gone. And they're going to be right back where they started, with Ukrainians going on an even stronger offensive at that point. That's when the desperation is going to mount. I'm thinking probably a month or two down the line from now. The desperation's really going to mount on the side of the Russians. Absolute desperation. And they're backed into a corner at that point. And that's what I'm worried about, is that period in time. Maybe I'm thinking it might be springtime before we get to that point. But that's the point I'm worried about. Now, the other side of this whole war could just end if they can find some sort of a peace accord or peace deal. But the Russians want to take a piece of something home with them. They want to be able to say, hey, look, we did this. A way out. Something, a bone. The old saying, give them a bone. They want to have something. But the Ukrainians are saying, you ain't getting nothing. You ain't going to get nothing. We're not going to give up any of our land, Ukraine is saying. And the Russians are like, and so they're not finding this peace. And I don't think they're going to find it, because the Russians don't want to back off without a piece of something. And the Ukrainians are saying, you ain't getting nothing. You ain't going to get nothing. Nothing. Zip. Zilch. And so the fight, I think, is going to continue. And there's going to be a point of desperation coming up a couple months down the line. And that's the point where we really got to watch out for the nukes to fly. Is when they get to the point of desperation, because they're consuming all of their conventional methods of warfare. They're consuming them all up. Look, 78% of their tanks are gone. Well, what happens when they got no tanks left? The Russians. 30% of their troops. What happens when they get to the point where it's like 50% of their troops are gone? What happens then? And the soldiers say, hey, I ain't going over there, are you? I don't want to go into the meat grinder, do you? That's what the soldiers look at one another and because it reminds me, the Germans had this problem on the Eastern Front back during World War II. And no German wanted to go to the Eastern Front. It meant to get sent to the Eastern Front for the Germans during World War II. Because, wintertime was setting in. Does this sound kind of familiar, guys? Wintertime was setting in. The Germans had went into those lands, and they had rode in the fall in their tanks and through the slippery mud and stuff. And they had made their positions to fight. And that set in cold. Suddenly set in cold. Well, it froze their tanks right in the mud. The tanks wouldn't move. They tried to shoot their weapons, and they didn't have the right kind of oil in their guns. And their guns froze up from the cold. They'd just go click, and they wouldn't fire. The firing pin, the wrong kind of oil. And the Russians came riding in with white suits on, so they blended in with the environment because of all the snow everywhere, on skis and stuff. And they had the right kind of guns and everything else, and it was turkey shoot. Well, that's the thing that can happen in the wintertime. And what we're looking at here is already a money pit. I mean, it's already a death pit, this whole thing, you know. But it could get an awful lot worse this winter. If you got Ukrainian soldiers who are equipped with fleece-lined jackets and everything, and they got, what's that stuff called that wicks up moisture and everything, and it's thinsulate or whatever. They got special materials that they can make clothing for the Ukrainians. They're receiving it from the West, you know. They got the latest and best kind of wool socks or whatever, you know, and they're sitting around drinking a tea before they go out to fight, you know, and all nice and warm, and had a good warm meal, and this is the kind of supplies that are coming for the Ukrainians from the West that allows them to fight without suffering quite as much. Let's just put it that way. Where the Russians, they don't even have any socks. They're going into this with poor supplies, not warm clothing, nothing to eat, nothing to drink, just a total mess. Can't sleep at night, whatever. And they're going to be, I'm not going to say they're outnumbered, but their numbers are going to dwindle really fast. So they're going to reach a point of desperation a couple months from now. Might not even be that long. It could be just a matter of weeks. Russians are going to reach this point of desperation. It's do or die. Meanwhile, they're sitting on all tremendous WMDs. The Russians. A tremendous stockpile. Not just nuclear, but you name it. You name it, the WMDs that they've amassed, all from the former Soviet Union, you know. And this desperation, I'm worried. I'm very worried and very concerned about what could happen. And then, to figure all this into the mix, if that wasn't enough, we got one of the biggest nuclear power plants on Earth that's right on the firing line. It's right in there. It's right in that where the big war's going on right now. I'll just call it the ZAP plant. ZAP plant. ZAP is like an electricity, you know. I'm not going to try to pronounce the plant. I mess up the pronunciation of it. But anyway, they got these 6 big, giant, enormous reactors there. Reactor cores that are running. A lot of them are, I guess they're up and running, some of them. And you know they're in the center of the whole action that's happening here. That could act as a trigger too, you know. I mean, what happens if they accidentally get a huge nuclear leak? Do you think the West is going to stay out and say, oh, the Russians, oh, you guys can handle it? Or are they going to bring in some sort of special forces or something if there's a radiation leak? There's so many uncertainties here about what could happen when you throw things like one of the world's biggest nuclear plants right in the middle of the mix of the war. This ups the ante on an already bad situation. So, you know, I mean, this is why I did one of my shows the other day, because heaven forbid if we did get into some sort of a nuclear exchange, you know, I want you guys, an awful lot of you guys say, well, if that happens, we're all dead anyway. No, that's not true. There's so many variables that could happen that you don't think about. Even if there was a full nuclear exchange, maybe a lot of the weapon systems that they've had put away for years on both sides might turn out to be duds. Maybe 3/4 of them, because they've been sitting in silos for... Well, you know what a silo is, a nuclear silo. They dig a big hole in the ground, basically. It goes down many stories underneath the ground. They got the nuclear weapon sitting down inside that hole. It fires from inside the hole. It fires up into the air and goes, you know. It's called nuclear silo. Well, they built those silos back during the Cold War, like in the 1950s and stuff. And rockets are notorious for blowing up on the launch pad anyway. I mean, for all you know, both sides could start this thing and 3/4 of their weapons might just go poop, 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 the malfunction. And so then we'd only be looking at 1/4 of the destruction. It's never over until it's over, And so for you guys out there say, oh, nothing will survive a nuclear, well, you don't know for sure what might happen. There's an old saying I have, many a slip twixt cup and lip. In other words, the guy, he's got his cup on the table, he's filled it with wine, and he picks it up delicately with his fingers, and he's slowly lipping it up toward his lips. He's going to take a drink. And all of a sudden, he stumbles in there and it falls all over the floor. He never expected that. Well, that's the way with any situation. There's an awful lot of variables that can go undetected until the situation actually happens. So, never give up. And one of the things is in life is knowledge is ever so important. And so that's why I did that show on my channel, because I'm trying to give you guys knowledge about how radiation functions, so you can save yourself if there is some sort of a bomb goes off not too far from where you live, so that you don't get all irradiated and sick and die, just with a few simple things. And one of my viewers, he sent in some information that I didn't know, and I went out and I researched it a little bit. He was talking about the effectiveness of water as a radiation shield. And so I was surprised. Water's a very effective radiation shield. As shielding, I was surprised by that. So my viewers are, you guys out there, my audience, you're very well informed. And I think that's really great. It's things you tell me that I didn't know. And I like it when you guys comment and get in there in the comment section and tell me things that I didn't know, anyway. Because no matter how much you know, there's always more to know. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening to my show. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.